At this point, you're probably running 10, 15, 20 agents at the same time. In fact, you're probably running them while you're watching this video. And if you're doing that, you probably need a good setup for work trees, or setting up copies of your codebase on your computer so each agent can run free. So I want to show you some simple tips to set up work trees that work with any coding agent, Claude Code or Codex, and also some pitfalls like startup commands and copying over environment variables that you can improve. So let's add a feature to this project. If you're like 80% of the internet, you're probably running Claude in order to do that. And if you're in the cool crowd of 20%ers using Codex, shout out to you. But if you're using Claude, you have a built-in solution for this that's called -- work tree. It's a simple CLI flag you can put on the front of Claude before you start working to say what directory you want Claude to work inside of, and it'll peel off and create a separate folder for you. For example, here, let's say I want to work on GitHub OAuth for this application. I can start up a work tree for that, and you'll notice everything else is the same, but we have our working directory changed to a work trees directory. And this is something you can tweak in your Claude settings, by the way. And the beauty of work trees is you can freely create another tab inside of that same directory and start up another coding task without having to think too hard. So if I wanted Claude to work on a second feature, I could do -- work tree again, describe the next feature that I want to do, and then fire off another agent inside of this directory. And this is a great way to just get started with work trees using whatever built-in tool you have. Now, another thing you'll run into when you're using this approach in its default configuration is it'll just copy over all the code and ignore any get ignored files. This is usually fine, but if you're reaching for more complex tools like browser use to have the agent click around the applications that it builds, you probably want to copy over some of those get ignored files as well so that the agent can access things. For example, I have a .env file that I like using for agents, and I like to copy that into every work tree that I create. To do that, you can actually configure Claude Code to copy over other ignored files. And I'll do this inside of another work tree to kind of prove out the point. If you ask it to use a work tree include file to describe what to copy over, I want to copy over all of my env files. Claude Code is smart enough to look up its own documentation and figure out how to add that. This will create a new settings file inside of the .claude folder. It can be global or it can be local to your project, which I would recommend for this sort of thing. And it'll just include the glob patterns to copy everything over. Here it's even offering to patch that change over to our other work trees. Now, if you're a Claude Code warrior, this is a great setup, but these days I tend to mix Claude Code and Codex together since I've found they're uniquely good at certain things. I have a full video about why I do that and the way we hold those models. So it would be nice to have a work tree solution that's simple like this, but isn't tied to any particular CLI. So for that, I would actually recommend the work tree tool that's built into the Warp terminal, which is what I'm using to run all these agents. Now I notice over here, I've just been using keyboard shortcuts to create a new tab in this terminal, but if I want to create a new work tree directory, for example, I can click on this plus button and I can load up a number of presets or configs, as they're called inside of here, to also run some commands when we create that new terminal session. And one of those is to run some commands to set up a work tree. And there's a speed dial function for that right down here. I can set up a new work tree config and then set the repository that I want to use. You can add your repo to this keychain. You can click on that project right here, and that'll create one of these shortcuts that you can click on in the future. So I've set this up for a number of projects on my machine to quickly start a work tree. I've set one up for this project that I'm working on right now. And when I click on it, it will start up that terminal session, but it will also launch me into agent mode since I configured it to do that. And it will run a few commands up front to create the new work tree with the randomly generated name and jump straight in there so I can start working. And from here, I'm free to run whatever I want. I can run Pi, I can run Codex, I can run Claude, and they're all going to be working inside of their own work tree setup. And another nice aspect of this is it's a configurable file to decide how the work tree should work. So you'll notice here if I hover over this work tree config, I can hit edit, and this will open up a little code editor to change all of the commands that run on startup. So right now, we're creating a work tree with the generated name and jumping in there. But I could change this to do whatever I want. So if I wanted some hidden directory in my machine where all the work trees live, I could configure that. And I could also add some setup commands if I want to. Like for this project, I like installing the dependencies right away. So while the agent is working, it's not wasting tool calls trying to figure out, oh, I forgot to install dependencies before I ran type check. Let me go do that. And naturally, as you can imagine, you can also add a command to copy over your environment variables, for example. Now, I don't know the full bash syntax to do that, so I'm actually going to have an agent edit this file. Another nice aspect is all these config files are just on your machine. Now with this added, I can start up that new work tree, and we should see it go in that new hidden folder, copy over all the environment variables with Symlinking, and I'll explain why I do that, and also install all the dependencies. So now when I start up Claude or Codex or whatever else, it has all the tools that it needs to actually write code. Now that one note on Symlinking. This is a very opinionated choice. Something that I run into, especially when I'm setting up new services inside of work trees, is I need to configure some environment variables for the agent to test its work, and then when the work tree is done, I forget to copy those environment variables back to the main version, and then I need to go hunt them down again. By using symlinks, it means that you can update environment variables inside the work tree, and then they copy back up automatically. Now this can go the other way, like if you want each work tree to have their own separate environment variables so they can test their work, it's probably not going to work for you. But remember, these configs are specific to each project. So maybe you have one project where this is totally fine, another one where you just want to copy them over, a third one where you don't want to copy them at all. You can just decide whatever commands you want to run. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is what you do when a work tree is done. You need to clean everything up, merge it back into the main line if it's like a local project, and also close out related GitHub issues, linear tickets, or whatever else. I found myself doing this enough times that I actually wrote a skill for this. To install it, you can install directly from me. You can install beelmsdev/skills. I have a few sort of shared resources that I throw on here, and one of them is called Done, which, as the name implies, it's when you're done with something. When you finish a feature, you can run this skill. And you can see the contents are super simple. It's just going to have the agent review any uncommitted code if it still exists, wrap it up into some nice atomic commits for all the changes that you made, and then if you're on a work tree, it will merge it back into master. This is a little more opinionated, since sometimes you might want to make a pull request instead of merging back into main. I use this skill specifically for side projects where I'm happy to merge it back into the code myself. And then at the end, I also ask the agent to look for related GitHub issues. You can expand this to look for linear tickets as well, because sometimes if you're asking an agent to work on a GitHub issue, and that's the pulled in context, it's nice to have it close that out when it's also closing the work tree. Just call /done if you have it installed in your setup, and then it'll go through all the changes made in the branch and merge it back in. So I hope you got something out of this to improve your work tree setup. I'm going to be spinning up another 5 agents as we speak. And if you want more content about coding agents, like, subscribe. I'm going to be posting a lot more. See you around.